Hi, grade 5. This week we are reading historical fiction in the Reading Writing Workshop textbook and also in your literature anthology later on in the week. Today we read The Day the Rollets Got Their Moxie Back. This week's essential question is, how do shared experiences help people adapt to change? So what we're going to read today will explain how shared experiences can help people adapt to certain changes. We're going to read about how a family comes together during a period of hardship in the United States. Sometimes the thing that gets you through hard times comes like a bolt from the blue. That's what my older brother's letter was like, traveling across the country from a work camp in Wyoming. It was 1937, and Ricky was helping to build facilities for a new state park as part of President Roosevelt's employment program. Though the program created jobs for young men like Ricky, it hadn't helped our dad find work yet. I imagined Ricky looking up at snow-capped mountains and sparkling skies, breathing in the smell of evergreens as his work crew turned trees into lumber and lumber into buildings. It almost made an 11-year-old weakling like me want to become a lumberjack. Back in our New York City apartment, the air smelled like meatloaf and cabbage. Dad sat slantwise in his chair by the window, obviously trying to catch the last rays of sunlight rather than turn on a light. My older sister Ruth and I lay on the floor comparing the letters Ricky had sent us. Surely, Ricky says they had a talent show, and he wore a grass skirt and did a hula dance while playing the ukulele. Ruth reported with delight. I'll bet he was the cat's pajamas. It'd be swell to have our own talent show, I replied. Should I start sewing grass skirts? Mom asked from the kitchen, which was just the corner where someone had plopped down a stove next to a sink and an icebox. Now come set the table. Dinner's almost ready. So the narrator here uses the phrase hard times and mentions that the year is 1937. Okay, and that her brother is working in President Roosevelt's employment program. So these details and prior knowledge of events that were happening during the time help us understand that the story takes place during the Great Depression. So this was a period of tough, difficult times in U.S. history, tough economic times. So people were not making money at the time. And this is an example of historical fiction. So here it is set during the time of the Great Depression. The narrator describes Wyoming here as being full of snow-capped mountains and sparkling skies and smelling of evergreens. But this is contrasted with the apartment that they're living in New York City as being dimly lit, smelling of meatloaf and cabbage. So one is a positive description and the second is a negative description. Dad stayed where he was, sullen and spent. Any jobs in the paper? Mom asked, her voice rich with sympathy. Dad shook his head no. He had worked as an artist in the theater for years, but most productions were still strapped for cash. Dad sketched posters for shows that did get the green light just to keep his skills sharp. He even designed posters for Rollets Follies, with Ruth and me depicted in watercolor costumes. For dinner, Mom served a baked loaf of whatever ingredients she had that worked well together. From the reddish color, I could assume that she had snuck in beets. I guarantee you'll like these beets, she said, reading my frown. It's beetloaf, the meatless meatloaf, she sang, as she served up slices. Ruth fidgeted in her seat, still excited about the talent show. Though calm on the outside, inside I was all a twitter too. Over the next week, Ruth and I practiced our Hawaiian dance routine. Our parents worried about heating bills as cold weather settled in. One Saturday, my father decided to grin and bear it and grab some hot coffee at the local soup kitchen where he hoped to hear about available jobs. Ruth and I begged to go along. Since the kitchen offered donuts and hot chocolate on weekends, he agreed. So the soup kitchen is a place where you can go if you don't have a place to, or if you don't have a way to eat, you can go and eat at the soup kitchen where food is served for those who need it. Most everyone in line was bundled up against the cold. Many of us had to rely on 2 or 3 threadbare layers. Like many other men, Dad bowed his head as if in shame. So he feels ashamed or embarrassed that he is at the soup kitchen because this means he cannot take care of his family. He cannot feed his family, right? This is what they think. The line moved slowly. Bored Ruth began practicing her dance steps. I sang an upbeat tune to give her some music. Around us, downturned hats lifted to reveal frowns becoming smiles. Soon folks began clapping along. Egged on by the supportive response, Ruth twirled and swayed like there was no tomorrow. "Those girls sure have Moxie," someone shouted. "They've got heart all right," offered another. "Why, they ought to be in pictures. With performances like that, I'd nominate them for an Academy Award," a woman called out. "Those are my girls," Dad declared, his head held high. Everyone burst into applause. For those short moments, the past didn't matter, and the future blossomed ahead of us like a beautiful flower. I couldn't wait to write Ricky and tell him the news. So here they are, smiling and making the most of a very difficult situation. Um, so Moxie means courage, determination, particularly in times of difficulty. So this word was first used in the 1930s. And during the 1930s, many countries in the world experienced tough economic times, high unemployment, people did not have jobs. This is what is called the Great Depression. And so here in this story, they make the most of a very difficult situation and they look on the bright side. Okay, so let's look again at the features. We looked at these on Sunday um, during our Zoom meeting. Let's look again. The selection that we just read is historical fiction. Why? It features events and settings typical of the time period in which the story is set and includes characters who act like and speak the dialect of people from a particular place in the past. Again, guys, what is dialect? This is speech that is typical of a place or time. It may include words, phrases, and idioms that might sound unfamiliar. Right? Like, for example, "I'll bet he was the cat's pajamas." What does this mean? This is an idiom. What does "I'll bet he was the cat's pajamas" mean? So to say someone was the cat's pajamas, this at the time was used as a phrase or a way to say that someone was cool, someone was special. And again, this is an example of dialect because this is something that was used in the past. So next in class, we answered page 216 in your turn practice workbook. So here we have an excerpt from a historical fiction text called Afternoons Alone. Let's read it and answer the questions together. Rusty moped around the empty house. Grandpa had been helping to build tanks at the factory since America declared war against Japan. Without him, there was nobody to fish with. There was no one to talk with in the afternoon. Yesterday, his friend Corey had told Rusty, "Every day after school, I clean the house and do chores. Then, when Mom returns home from the tank factory, we can have some fun time together." "How keen it will be when the war ends," exclaimed Rusty. "We'll have lots of family time then," Corey said excitedly. Rusty eyed the dirty windows in his house and said to himself, "Maybe I can help with some chores too." So how do we know that this is historical fiction? It takes place in an earlier time. So it says that America declared war against Japan, and this happened in 1941. So this is how we know this is in the past. What events in the text are typical of the time period in which the text is set? So here, men and women are working in the tank factory, okay? Because again, there is going to be a war against Japan, and so this is why people are working on the tanks in the factory. Write an example of dialect in the text and tell what it means. So here we have several examples. We have moped around. What does moped around mean? Let's look at the text. Well, here it says, Rusty moped around the empty house. This means that he acted sad. He walked around the house sad. Keen here means terrific. Now, this is not the common definition for keen, how keen it will be when the war ends, but this is the way that it was used here. So keen here means terrific, fantastic. And the last one is eyed. All right, let's find eyed in the text. Okay, so here we have the last sentence. Rusty eyed the dirty windows in his house and said to himself, maybe I can help with some chores too. So eyed here means looked at or stared at.